Alright, it's the morning. I got my coffee and I've got time to work on models. Finally. Sorry I've been away for so long, guys. If I ever cancel the channel, I will tell you. I'm not just gonna like pull up stakes and not do videos anymore, not tell anybody. So if you guys get a couple weeks where I'm not around, it's just because life got in the way. Today, I'm going to cut out the cab glass for these little guys. So when you put the factory glass in there, you get this ledge. I don't like that ledge. That ledge just makes everything look kind of out of scale. And when you look at it closely, you can see that the glass doesn't even really fit well. It's just kind of a poor appearance after you put a lot of work into the model. Now then, my new skylight that I put in there, you can see there's a bit of a gap in there as well. I'm gonna move the camera over a bit. So let's drop this guy out. So how do we mitigate that? How do we change and make it look a little bit more realistic? Cut the glass out and fit it inside the holes. So this one I can do that, but I run into a bit of a problem, and that's right here. You can see the glass is not deep enough, so the piece that's molded in the front is too thick to allow me to cut this out without interfering with that. I can do it for this one and this one, but I'm kind of in trouble when it comes to this one back here. And if I look on the inside, I don't really have much room to work with that. So what do? We simply source out some new plexiglass. This is a $1.13 piece of plastic, and it used to be a lot bigger than this. You can get this stuff at pretty much any store near you that sells plexiglass plastic, or the other option is you can go to a place like Michael's or Hobby Lobby, any place that has picture frames, and get picture frame plastic. So inexpensive picture frames come with plastic instead of glass, and that's what all this is just a little piece of picture frame plexiglass. Now how do you go about cutting it? You got a couple options. The first is kind of dirty, but it works, and it's the score and snap method. This would be the same method that you would use for thicker pieces of polystyrene. You take an X-Acto blade and you score a really deep line, and then you snap it. You apply even pressure to each side and you snap it. The other option is you can use a saw, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to use my bandsaw after I trace out the amount of plastic that I need, and I'm going to cut it into place. Now what I plan to do is cut out a sheet of plastic that's the same shape as this, and then I'm going to lay it behind here and then score it in. This sheet that I'm working with looks like it's really scuffed up, but it's just the protective film that sits on the outside of it. So it's not nearly as beat up as it looks like. Alright, now that we have the piece of plastic cut out, see it just fits right in there. Didn't need to be precise, just needed to be the right size to fit inside there. You also notice that I left the shrink wrap on the outside. The reason for that is because I want to keep this thing as protected as I can, as long as I can. Eventually, I'm going to cut out pieces small enough that I don't think that stuff's going to stay on there. We'll cross a bridge when we get there. So you got a couple options here. You can mark out where you want to cut, you can score out where you want to cut, or you can do both. I'm going to do both. If I get the pen cap off here. The reason why is because I want to be able to just knock a bunch of material off real quick and make my like initial cuts with ease, and then the score lines will help me do the more precise fitting of this. Now this is very time intensive. It is not my favorite part of this project. If it didn't make the model look so much better, I wouldn't even do it. I would just glue this in behind and call it. But I'm telling you, when you fit it inside the window port, it looks so much better. The detail is a nice improvement, especially for those of you guys that like to weather your machines and make them look even more realistic than people like me who just set it on the shelf and pretend it just came out of the factory. This will add even more detail to that. You can even take throughout your process of weathering models, which I don't know squat about weathering models. This is something you can do during that process. You can take your model apart, take the factory glass, cut it, reinsert it into the window ports, and have even more accuracy added to the model that you're working on. Alright, so we got the glass back in there. Now it's time to score it in there. Got two different tools here. A trusty old Harbor Freight X-Acto blade, and then I have trusty old Harbor Freight wannabe dental implement that is made from a really low grade steel that I have heated throughout the years and abused, and I put it back through a sharpening using my disc sander. So this will probably be good for about one window until it folds over and creates a really bad tip. But I like using something like this because regardless of how I turn it, it doesn't change the point of contact as long as I keep it at an angle where this doesn't interfere with that. The problem with something like an X-Acto blade is these have a tendency to walk where they want to go if you turn it and don't keep it perfectly straight, but I might have to resort to that if this guy gets bent up. So, let's sit down here. Position this in such a way that we can all see. Alright, pretty straightforward, just take your time with it. And you want to press hard enough to score a good line in there. Actually, I'm going to come in from the bottom here. You want to press hard enough that you can score a good line in there, but keep enough pressure on it that you're not going to mess up and like slide it around. And you want to make sure you can cut through that protective film. I know, strange concept. See, it's already bent the tip over because this thing is cheap. I think I'm going to go on eBay and find some used dental implements that are made with real stainless steel and not cheapo stainless steel. So I'm going to use the blade going backwards instead. That will lessen the chance of the blade walking off, and will still allow me an opportunity to score into the plastic. Again, I'm trying to go to the very line where this thing meets, because I'm trying to just identify right where that window is. I don't know if you saw what just happened right there, but even just the back of the blade, it caught this little ledge here and kind of like walked it up there. So caution to be used when you're using an X-Acto blade to score your stuff in. Let's go around one more time with this guy. If you're going to use a disc sander, one thing you got to be aware of, and it's going to happen on this one even with the low RPMs, is you're going to get like the melty bits of plastic that you're grinding off, and it's going to create like this lip. So just be mindful of that, because if you're grinding off too much plastic and that lip gets down into that cavity, it could potentially pull the workpiece into it and goof it up. There's something to be mindful of. And because I'm leaving the protective plastic on the outside of this, it's an even bigger likely scenario. All right. So I've got these roughly ground into shape. Now it's time to start the little bits of tedious fitting and adjusting. Start with one side and work your way to the other, so that way you don't end up taking too much material out of one spot. I might actually have to redo this one because when I was talking about it getting grabbed by the disc sander, that happened on this one, and I might have a little bit of a void down there. If it's not too big, then I'm not going to worry myself with it, because the glue, that crystal clear stuff that I like to use, will fill it in. But now I'm going to start the tedious process of sanding and fitting all of the various angles and ends in. The first thing you got to do is come in with your file or sanding stick and start rounding the corners out, because that's what's going to be your first obstacle. And then from there you can start basically sanding down the various sides. Work three sides. Have one side that you're not going to touch, because once you get it flat, you know that it's going to fit. And then you just have to bring those other two sides in to make sure that they will drop in, and then you bring the bottom one in to make sure that one will fit. Or do it the other way around. You make sure these two are the right distance apart, and then you start bringing these guys in to try to make it fit. And this is where it becomes such a time-consuming task, because it's all little bits of sanding and grinding to get everything to fit in right, and which is what I'm going to have to do for the rest of this. These are going to be the most challenging ones to do because they have so many angles on them, and then filling in the rest of the other pieces of window glass will be much easier, but this is going to take some time. Alright, so we got the window almost all the way in. I'm at that point now where I'm just doing this tiny little touch-ups around the edge to make this thing fit in there, and it's coming along well. I think I've got everything good except for this front corner right there. I just need to sand that down a bit more, and then this will pop in. Something that I didn't mention earlier, these openings aren't always flat, and what I mean by that is the inside of this opening right here is a little bit smaller than the outside here, and I think they do that so that when they take the molds apart, these pop out easier without grabbing. That's something to bear in mind. If you're going to go fitting the windows in, figure out which direction you want to fit them in from. Though I did put these inside to score them out, because it's kind of the only way to do it, I did intend on fitting them in from the outside as I am sanding them and fitting them. So it's just something to keep in mind. And if you're wondering why I scored into this, it's because through all this working and touching and manipulating, I end up rubbing all that ink off of there. So the ink is more intended to give me that first cut, and then the score line is to give me the ability to come in and tune this up a little bit more precisely. And if this film ends up coming off, then I still have my original lines. I'm not depending on the stuff that I drew on the plastic on the outside. And I've filed that other corner down, so now the window sits nice and flush. It'll be easier to visualize again once I get it painted. I'm not going to take the protective film off these yet, because I want to keep them as free of scratches and marks as I can, but not too bad. Especially if you're going to do it to something that doesn't have a ton of like little tiny windows like this. These are going to be dreadful to do, but I'm going to do them next to get them out of the way, because I want to do the difficult stuff first. But yeah, that's the result you get, instead of the other way where, look, I can slide this in behind it, instead of the other way where it sits in so deep that you get this cavity. And when you go to paint it, if you have a machine that doesn't have, this is all blacked in around the cab, which is going to make it a lot easier. But another detail that always helps make the windows look better, if you don't feel like doing that, cutting these out, is to take this whole area, including this lip around the edge, and paint that black. That kind of helps hide some of that depth, but again, nothing beats putting it inside, because it just really fixes that huge ledge. As you progress closer and closer to getting your final fit, start identifying the spots where you get a little bit of overhang. Again, that little line that we score into this, is only accurate to a certain point. After that, it just kind of it disappears. So I've identified that this is a spot where it's hanging over, and because this is clear, it's easier to tell. So I've taken the marker and just marked that corner. I don't need to touch any of the other spots over there. And then I do believe there's a little bit back here that needs to be ground down too, but I want to get this one ground down first because that's the biggest ledge. And I'm talking about like a hair over. With the bigger windows, it's easier to do, obviously because you have more to retain and stuff, but you get a little bit of flex. So if you have a spot that's not ground back enough, you can kind of like slide it in and it will all fit together. But when it comes to these smaller windows, it's much more rigid because there's not as much of the material to flex, so you have to be a little bit more precise. And if you do end up grinding a little too much, you get a little bit of a void. That glue that I'm going to use later, that clear cockpit glue that I like so much, will actually fill that in and make the transition almost invisible. Alright, and the back one is in. And there's actually enough friction holding this thing in place that probably don't even need glue. And honestly, I might not even use glue. I think there might be just the tiniest little gap there on the bottom. But I don't think glue is going to be needed for this. And to get it out, I have to, take like a little tool, this little piece of popsicle stick here, and pop it out from the back. If it takes that much force to get it out, I don't think I need glue. The cab glass is cut and done. It looks kind of funky because it still has the clear on it, but it's all cut and installed. And then the front, I did 2 pieces because the US version of the cab has the smaller plexiglass piece in the bottom than the top one. You flip this up, and then I believe this comes out, and then you stow it behind the seat. And then got the skylight in there. That's good. It's done. That was definitely pretty challenging, especially for the little smaller ones, getting those in place, but it's gonna definitely be worth the extra effort. Will get me a good result. Alright guys, I have made, I think, the smallest, most complex thing I've ever made, the windshield wiper blades. This was really, I was not sure how I was going to do this, but this ended up turning out really good, and I'll tell you what I did. So this is really small, and I need something to point at it with. This is 0.5 mil brass wire that I took and crushed in the vise so that it kind of thins out right here to make these beams a little bit more narrow and a little bit more realistic. And then the wiper blade itself is 1 mil tubing that I smashed in the vise, and then I cut into shape and then just connected it with this little pin and then drilled it in, or drilled holes in the cap and then installed it. It will get glued and fixed into place later, but that is the top wiper blade. But I didn't leave the bottom wiper blade out of the picture either. Let's go ahead and drop this guy in here. You can see I did the bottom wiper blade as well. It's a little wonky right now just because everything has to be tweaked a little bit and put into place, but they will be straightened up, and I really hope I cut the glass in the right spot. I didn't fit the glass yet, but I did make that little mark right there of where the glass split is. If I goofed that up, I will take it apart. Just a couple tiny little things left on here I'm not even going to put in this episode, one of which is creating the grab rail for the cab. And then that is it. The next episode, we'll start with a dry mock-up of the model, which is basically I'm going to assemble all of it in its entirety and show it to you guys once I've got all the last little odds and ends created for this, everything except the glass, so you guys can see what it looks like. That's my favorite part of the build, is getting to see it all mocked up in the die-cast, but all of the little details, all the complicated stuff, this is the last soldering thing I had to do for this, and it is good to go. I think the mock-up will probably be sans the lines as well, because I always put those in at the very end. So next episode will be dry mock-up, and then priming and body work, which is an important part of the project. And then I think the next episode after that will be painting, or maybe I'll do it all together in one. I'm not sure. There will be a bit of a gap because of the amount of time it takes for the paint to cure. So fear not, you guys will see the end of this project. But thanks for hanging in there with me, and yeah, man, I'm so excited about this little thing right now. I was really like stressing this. I wasn't sure how I was going to create something this small. I didn't want to just use the 5mm wire in its current form, because as you can see, it is a bit thicker than this stuff. I mean, it's marginal, but with all the work that I put into trying to make sure everything on this project is scale, that really would have thrown things off a bit for me. So anyways, I'll see you guys in the next episode.